Laura Garcia, welcome to the Tripson Global on Wheels podcast hour.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Laura Garcia is a Mexican feminist who has advocated for human rights, social justice, and civil society throughout her career. Before joining Global Green Grants, Laura served for 7 years as the executive director of Fondo Semillas, a Mexican nonprofit organization that finances grassroots organizations to achieve gender equality. Laura has vast experience in grassroots philanthropy, human rights, and movements for social justice. And she has co-created networks to promote community philanthropy in the global south. She holds a master's degree in international peace and security from King's College London. She currently serves on the boards of Oxfam Mexico, Justicia Transición Mexico. Is that right?
Justicia Transicional, Transitional Justice.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. I was wondering how to say it. And Aldea Disbois.
Yes.
So thank you so much. You have a very impressive background. So the Global Green Grants Fund, who you're with right now, can you give our viewers and listeners a very simple and clear background of what you guys do and what are the top agendas?
Sure. So Global Green Grants Fund is an environmental foundation that supports grassroots organizations all over the world who and activists who work on the intersection between environmental and social justice issues. So we have different action areas. For example, we work on climate justice, promoting regenerative economies, and they have agroecological projects all over the world to sustain different and alternative modes of living and livelihoods. We support many indigenous groups around the world. We also support women's rights groups in the intersection with environmental justice. We have recently, over the last few years, been in collaboration with the Ford Foundation on supporting organizations led by people with disabilities who are working in issues related to environmental degradation and climate change, for example. So our vision is a world in which we can live with more justice and equality and live and protect our shared space and planets. We fund over 1,000 grantees and organizations all over the world in more than 160 countries around the world, and we fund around 1,000 per year. We give more or less like smaller grants, and more than 40% of our grantees are only receive funding from Global Green Grants. So they are really emerging and very local and community-led groups that need our support, our financing to do the amazing things that they do in their communities. And so we specialize in grassroots movements. We support all of these groups that are really emerging, and most of them, as I mentioned, are outside the radar of other funders.
Mm-hmm. Wow, you guys do a lot of work. So you're keeping quite busy with over 1,000. Did you say 1,000 projects?
Yes, so we support 1,000 projects, and they are the very busy ones, the activists on the ground. We have a model where we have created over the years, based in really in trust and relationships with environmental activists who are renowned activists and really connected to the movements in different parts of the world. And when we start working, for example, when we started working some years ago with identifying groups, and we intentionally did this with a network to start to identify groups of that were working to promote the rights of people with disabilities and the intersection with climate justice. We started seeing how it unfolded, and there's more and more groups working on this, and there's more and more opportunities for the climate justice movement to gain a lot of strength from the brain power of these groups who are doing amazing things, but that for many reasons, including ableism and discrimination, they have been neglected, and they have not been visible in the climate justice movement and the environmental movement in general.
Wow, I think you even covered the question that I'm going to ask you about later. So does your organization provide many grants to nonprofits, projects, and entrepreneurial pursuits spearheaded by people with disabilities at all?
Yes, thank you, Ming. It's actually, so Global Green Grants Fund has existed for 30 years. Through our network of advisors who are environmental activists, who know and work with social movements in different regions in the world, and recognize and identify many of the groups that we support. We started to have a conversation with the Ford Foundation because we started to gain an interest in the connection between disability rights and environmental justice. And we started to identify something which is very important for us to recognize and say it in a transparent way. Because we work with the environmental justice movements, we, throughout these years, we had not recognized that we were not really being able to we were not supporting disability rights groups before, and we had to intentionally embark on this journey, which has been amazing, on learning first internally what is the connection and what is the type of work, and how can we start identifying organizations and groups working with persons or led by persons with disabilities, to be able to start recognizing and creating a roadmap to start supporting more and more these type of groups. The environmental justice movement has historically ignored and not included people with disabilities. And this is because of the system of ableism and discrimination against people with disabilities that have not been trusted to have a voice, that have not been included in tables where we discuss climate change around the world, for example. One of the things that we started identifying more and more is that obviously there's very unique and particular affectations of climate disasters, for example, with people with disabilities. And that is very much connected, not only because they are the ones who suffer the most, but because they are also the ones and their groups who are leading solutions creatively with climate adaptation, for example, and climate resilience. So we need that brain power to be articulated with the whole climate justice movement in the world. So because of that, we started identifying more and more groups. And up to now, we have supported more than 40 groups led by these people with disabilities in the intersection with climate justice.
That was very well said. So 2 follow-ups from what you just said. You said, people with disabilities are some of the most affected by climate change. Why you believe that? And then 2, you said there are Global Green Grants Fund have funded around 40 projects. Just telling us, not in detail with going through each one, but like generally, what are the projects concerning the scope of it?
Sure. So it has been documented, for example, that with the disasters, natural disasters, and with the climate crisis unfolding, there's going to be more and more disasters. People with disabilities are the ones who suffer the most, because the system has been the system of exclusion that we have for people with disabilities make them more vulnerable whenever a disaster happens. This is because for any type of disasters, whenever there's going to be an earthquake or the announcement of a disaster from the government, the systems are not really are not adapted to people who maybe cannot hear a siren, for example. Also, the people who live in wheelchairs have a lot of difficulties in moving away from their houses whenever there's a need to be somewhere else and to move away from your house upon an imminent disaster. There's also, we have a case, and I'm going to answer your second question. One of the grantees that we support is a grantee from Nigeria. Our grantee from Nigeria is in the Evoca village of the Niger Delta. There's 2 methane gas flares that have been causing ear injuries and blindness and eye injuries to many children and many people from this village, for example, and this community. So we started supporting an organization called PEDANET, which is Persons with Disabilities Action Network, because in this town, the life expectancy of people, because of the environmental degradation, is 41 years. This tells us something very important. The disaster zones or sacrifice zones, which are the places where the system and society have decided that, these places will just be affected by our economic activities, and it has been a decision, and we it's not a coincidence, obviously, that these sacrifice zones are zones with with people who have been marginalized. These are zones that are usually composed of people of color, indigenous people, and people who have been excluded naturally because of colonialism, because of racism, because of sexism. And these people then start suffering from physically from the consequences of living in a place like this. The grantee that we support there is encouraging people with disabilities to start campaigning against climate change and to start campaigning for projects that are for example, clean the place around and start thinking about solutions. And this is very important because it's also very connected to empowerment. It's also very connected to some of the testimonies that we have picked up from our grantee partners in the ground, who are people with disabilities whose lives have been transformed because of this. We have another grantee from Honduras, this is an organization that was formed after many Miskito men who were traditionally fishermen in their communities, because of climate change, but also because of the difficulties in the economic market being more and more, exercising more and more pressure for them to fish more and more. They started diving in and taking and diving for example, in search for lobsters. But because of the pressure, they started diving much more often and many more hours than like what is normally recommended for divers. This started having an effect physically because of the decompression syndrome, which is that like when you dive more often than you're supposed to, they didn't have the proper equipment. So many of them started having mental and physical health issues and problems with that. And many in these communities have been physically disabled because of this system. And so therefore they joined as a group, they formed this organization, and we started we started supporting this mosquito association of people who have been unfortunately impacted by this problem.
Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. It's been obvious throughout this conversation how aware you are of including the different voices, even the language of the disability community, ableism, and different things that you've brought up, situations. You're very aware of the issue. In the climate change fight, how I think you'll agree with me. There's a lack of representation of people with disabilities. How do you think we can increase that and make it more proportionate, more equal to the global population? There are 1 billion people in the world that have a disability, and in any given country, take the US, 20% of the country has a disability. And so how can we amplify their voice in a way that is more representative of the numbers?
Sure. I think with the work that you are doing and the work that we are doing, and to just inspire more stories where we actually provide evidence that this is not just about inclusion. Obviously, inclusion matters a lot, but we cannot imagine solutions if we don't have everybody in the table. And this is something that we radically need to shift our perspective. This is really about understanding that if we want to construct and create a world that's better, we cannot do that if we continue to replicate the systems that exclude people. With regards to your question, what can we do? The most important thing that we can do is encourage the connections between different social movements where disability rights is seen as a cross-cutting issue everywhere. Because disability rights is not only about protecting the rights of people, of 15% of the world population, but it's really about what happens with that other 85% who has not been thinking with an open mind on how to recreate a system the way that with a lot of creativity, people with disability have been thinking about urban design with a universal design, and that universal design framework is incredibly important for climate change. We need to think about a universal design of our system and our world in which we share this planet, in which we include everyone, in which everyone can have access to live happily and in connection to nature.
Very passionately said. And in regards to adding on to that, how is the Global Green Grants Fund, finding creative ways to be more aware of the needs and of the disability community, especially in regards to climate change? And you brought up a couple times now in regards to evacuation plans, disaster planning, and people with disabilities are at a disadvantage. You were saying wheelchair users and having a harder time evacuating. I myself am a manual wheelchair user. And then you're talking about the deaf community, a very valid point of how they can't hear the evacuation sirens. And so what is the Global Green Grants Fund doing?
Well, first of all, I think that it's very important for us to mention that Global Green Grants Fund has always worked with providing support directly to the people who are leading these solutions and who have a direct relationship with a social problem that they want to address. So we don't provide money to organizations that are not led by disabled persons, for example, but who are working with them. Because in a way that would replicate a top-down approach where we don't really encourage the trust that we need to put in this world to make people lead their own processes of change and of solutions to their own social problems and those of their communities. So we really believe in the mantra of nothing about us without us. This has been a mantra that I know it's very important in the movement of peoples and persons with disabilities, but it's also a very important mantra with other movements, the sex workers movements, for example, and other type of movements in this world where people are tired of having others decide for us. So in Global Green Grants, we have a decentralized decision-making model in which we want to reverse the bad impact that traditional philanthropy has had, in which we in philanthropy used to provide money and financing for solutions that didn't include the people who were living those problems. So the first thing that I want to say here is that we want to encourage more and more philanthropy moving towards that mantra or that philosophy where the people who are financed and the groups and movements who are financed are the ones who should be leading with autonomy their own strategies. And this is something that we have been doing. However, we also are seeing an opportunity, especially with regards to this program and initiative that we have in encouraging more and more people with disability and disability rights organizations to absorb strategies and activities that are related or connected with environmental justice. We also see that this is an opportunity for all of us in this sector to understand better how to make that connection. People who are like me, for example, who are not participating actively within or are not activists of the disability rights movements, we need to learn much more how to identify concepts better, how to think about respectful ways of identifying inclusion and more representation, how to destroy our systems of thought that are very much immersed in ableism and discrimination and exclusion. And we need to understand that and be taught by the disability rights movement how to do that much better.
Exactly. And I have to say that I am very, as I've interviewed you, which happens very rarely, is I get more and more excited about hearing what you're saying, because you do seem to be making an effort, even though you just came on board in March. You know, the language, you can just tell by the type of language that you're striving to use. Ableism, nothing about us without us, 15% of the population, that is already going miles and miles further than any other leaders. And so I am really excited about your leadership and your, progressive way of thinking. And so the next question, I already know the answer to, given, hearing you speak and hearing your really creative and open-minded ideas. But how do you think your unique identity of, being a Mexican feminist make you a more effective CEO for the Global Green Grants Fund, rather than, having another white man in the position?
Thank you, Ming. And first of all, with regards to your previous comment, I just want to mention that I actually feel that I'm learning so much more with Green Grants, and it's amazing work that happened way before I arrived here. And this is really Green Grants' story. It's I am a learner here, and I want to also learn much more about this incredible opportunity that we have in the world to understand how to creatively solve problems and think about a better society and system that includes everyone. And these ideas and propositions and policies that have been advocated by the disability rights movement are, in my opinion, one of the best ways that we can think or rethink systems. And this is, for me, something that I hope I can continue learning, and not only learning, but at the same time encouraging more work in Green Grants Fund to provide these connections and possibilities. Now, with regards to your question, I think that it's difficult to say in comparison, because I think that there's many advantages and possibilities of having organizations led by whoever. It doesn't matter the color or the background, as long as we are consciously creating organizations that have a culture of more representation, and a culture where we consciously think about privilege and systems. However, with my background as a feminist Mexican, I would say that, first of all, feminism brings me the opportunity to apply feminist theory as a tool to think critically about solutions. I think that feminism and the feminist theory is a tool that lets us also think about how to deconstruct systems and understand oppression much better, and understand intersectionality, for example, and solutions. And so I think that my feminist background has allowed me, or provides me, as I come to this organization, not only with the clarity of everything that we gain by including women in everywhere, not just like in every place of society, in every layer of our political, economic, and social system where women have been subordinated. Feminism allows me to understand that well, but it also allows me to understand other problems applying feminist theory. And I think that can be an advantage, I hope.
I think you bring a lot to the table, and with how sensitive and how aware and willing to learn you are, I think that Global Green Grants Fund is definitely lucky to have such a such an open-minded person to be leading this fund. And I think one thing I do disagree on is, I think we all have blind spots, and although skill sets and compatibility and fit are important, it's also important to bring people with different backgrounds, whether that be gender or nationality or disability or sexual orientation or whatever. I think everybody has blind spots, and if you keep bringing white men on board as leaders, they are important as leaders, but they have blind spots, and a lot of white men have the same blind spots, because that is the kind of lived experience. And so if you don't bring a diverse representation of people on board, not everybody's needs are going to be represented. And so
you said it really well, and I agree with you. I think that I would just be like, I would just put a challenging thought here, that what we really need to continue doing is to understand that white male power is not sufficient for us to cover these blind spots in many ways, because I still, as a woman and as a Mexican, need to think about the privilege that we have here as a fund, for example, and as a funder. I still need to think about all those things that are missing and that I'm unconsciously replicating. And ableism is one in which I want to learn much more, to be able to get that off of my head and to think about a way to live differently. So what I want to say here is that, yes, I agree with you, but I also think that there's other systems that I need to be conscious about, and everybody else too.
good points. Thank you. I was excited about your leadership at the Global Green Grants Fund before. That's why, we invited you to the podcast show. And after talking to you, I'm even more excited of what the future brings at the Global Green Grants Fund because of, how insightful you are, how open-minded, as I've said over and over, and, sensitive to the different groups and, just willing and hungry to learn and be the best that you can be with yourself and for the organization, for the fund, and funding and giving out funds that really represent the population at large. So thank you so much.
No, thank you, Megan. It's a pleasure to be part of this podcast and to continue learning from your community of listeners as well, perhaps in the future. Thank you.
Did you like this video? If so, share with your friends and be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want even more resources, be sure to sign up for our email updates on our website, trapesandglobal.com. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive because it will make the world a better place for you and for everyone else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Trapes and Global on Wheels podcast hour.